So good morning, everybody. I was asked to remind you all that we have the same interaction that we had on all of our other sessions, and that should be pointed out very soon, I think, up there. There it is. All the different ways in which you can interact. And your questions will be shown up to us on the screens, and I will have them here. And I hope that we will, as much as possible, be able to have a good number of questions and interaction with you. Our session this morning is entitled, How Could a New Regime Change China's Governance? Now, next month, as you know, there will take place in November, the 18th Congress of the Communist Party of China. It will see the appointment of the key members of China's political leadership, and especially we're looking at some new names at the very top. To look at what this might mean, what changes might, or in fact might not occur, we have a distinguished group of panelists, and I'll give them to you in alphabetical order, not as they're sitting here, but in alphabetical order, and they can raise their hand. Pei Minxin. Minxin is director of the Keck Center for International and Strategic Studies at Claremont McKenna College. He is also professor of government and a prolific writer on China issues. Susan Shirk is professor of China and Pacific Relations at the University of California, San Diego. Susan served as the U.S. Deputy Secretary of State in the Bureau of East Asia and Pacific Affairs from 1977 to 2000, and among her many publications, two are of particular interest to us today. They're Changing China and China, Fragile Superpower. Hu Xilai. Xilai is Dean of the School of Communication and Design at Sun Yat-sen University, and she is also the editor-in-chief of Caixin Media, which is a large media group dedicated to providing financial and business news through a very, very broad range of traditional and new media. She is the recipient also of many international awards and recognitions. And Yan Lan, who you all know well from many previous meetings in Deauville, she is the head of Greater China Investment Banking at Lazard China. Previously, I should say, she was partner in charge of the Beijing office of Gide Loiret Noël, and active in the field of mergers and acquisitions and foreign direct investment projects in China. So we're going to start, first of all, just setting the scene. And the first question that I would have for everyone is, what is going on? What is going to happen? Why do we read in our newspapers that this is so important, this forthcoming party congress? Susan, you want to kick off on that one?
Sure. Well, first of all, what's important is that the Chinese Communist Party is going to have a peaceful turnover of leadership, and that the current leader, Hu Jintao, is voluntarily going to retire from office. Whenever an authoritarian regime manages to get the current leader to actually step down after a fixed term of office, that's big news. And this is only the second time that China has ever done this. The first time was in 2002. Now, of course, the pyramid gets quite narrow at the top, and it means that of the, say, 8 contenders of the appropriate age on the Politburo, there are only maybe 5 or 7 seats at the Standing Committee of the Politburo. And then, of course, moving up to the Politburo, there are many more contenders than seats. So how do you handle the problem of disappointed losers? How can the party figure out how to manage this? This is a great challenge, and the fact that I had thought maybe they would find a new method of selecting leaders in order to address the problem this time, but it looks like they're using the same old smoke-filled room that they did 10 years ago.
Do you agree with that, Minxin? And then I'll come to Xilai afterwards. So Minxin first.
Well, I do agree. I think there can be a better method, because what is happening in China today is generating a lot of uncertainty, both for the Chinese people, for the international community, and for the markets. Policy on many fronts is paralyzed. We just don't see things moving in Beijing when actually many key decisions need to be taken.
Yeah, but are there any encouraging signs that we should be looking at? Anyone want to look at that? Or Shuli, would you like to answer the first one about how important, why is this so important?
I think it is important because we can hope more. I think because we cannot guess what is going to happen after the new leadership. Because if we guess something, it's very easy to put into our own wishful thinking. But I should say we can hope, and I don't know clearly what we're hoping. What we hope is like this, because the society needs really a new momentum on political reform. And I think Chinese people do hope after the new leadership there can be further reform in all the perspectives, including economic reform, cultural reform, social reform, as well as the most necessary, like political reform.
That's very interesting. Let me come to Yanlan. First of all, as I say, what is really different, you think, this time? And then come and pick up on what you said, Hushidi, and ask you, is it right that we should be hoping for these kinds of large changes? Go ahead.
Yeah, first of all, I want to say this will be the 5th generation of Chinese leaders. And this, so Xi Jinping and Li Keqiang, they will form a team to lead the 5th generation of Chinese leaders. So they are, I think the difference comparison with their predecessors are they are younger, they are more educated. What is interesting to notice is both of them were educated among the first student after Cultural Revolution. So this is quite important. They got a very good education in China, and they studied not only Chinese and also Western economic theory, and so open mind and more sophisticated culturally. So this is the characteristic of this young generation. I think it will be important in their future decision-making process.
I'd like to come back to what Shuli mentioned a minute ago, which is maybe this is a time or a change or a transition where both people inside of China and many partners, business partners and people outside are looking for some signs and some hope that there are going to be some reforms. However, I know, Min-Shin, that you maintain that there's some fundamental fragilities today inside, particularly the Communist Party itself. And at this particular moment, you've also mentioned that we're on a somewhat bumpy road in this transition. Why do you say that?
Well, this transition, if you compare this transition with the previous one, there's one huge difference. That is, in the lead up to this transition, something very ugly happened in Beijing. They had to purge a very important politician by the name of Bo Xilai. I'm sure you've read a lot of coverage about this individual, and Suli will talk more about why the Bo Xilai case is very important. And that's just the lead up to the transition. And when you look ahead, what's going to happen after the transition, first of all, as I said, there's a lot of uncertainty. We do not know whether the transition will be clean, whether Mr. Hu Jintao will retire completely. We also do not know who will actually be appointed to various important political and economic positions. And third, and finally, this new leadership is going to face a series of very, very difficult policy choices. They've delayed taking difficult choices for very long, but they can no longer delay, both internally and externally.
Susan, how do you feel about that? Do you think that there are these fragilities? Do you think, as you said before, that we were hoping things would be decided differently, but they're not being decided differently? How do you see this?
Well, I think exactly because the leaders are so nervous about their survival in power. You know, there are not many communist authoritarian governments trying to stay on top of a society that's been so dramatically changed by market reform and opening. And they saw the collapse of the Soviet Union and all the other communist countries, so they're very nervous. And after 1989, the Tiananmen crisis, their approach has been more to strengthen control. But I think there are some people at the highest levels in China who recognize that some political reforms might actually be helpful to the long-term survival of party rule, such as legal system reform. Right now, all the disputes and discontents of the society are brought to party and government to resolve, and it's a tremendous burden on them, and of course they don't do it very effectively. But if you could open up a truly independent legal system, many of those disputes that really don't have anything to do with politics could be managed much more effectively in an independent legal system, and they have committed normatively to the rule of law. It's even with the Bo Xilai prosecution, they've made the point that no one is above the legal system. So that's something of a test here to see whether or not there are serious intentions to deliver on the promise of rule of law.
That's very interesting, and I think let's investigate that a little further, both in the issues you've mentioned and then also perhaps on the commercial side as well. Xilai, did you want to come in on any of these issues?
I think I want to talk a little bit about the Bo Xilai's case because I agree with Susan and Mingxin that Bo Xilai's case is a big challenge, was a big challenge, but also I want to add on that. And I think Bo Xilai's case is also a great opportunity for China to carry out further reform. What we can see, like according to the official investigation, Bo's case is very special, very interesting actually. He shared many of the traits of corrupt officials. Number one, you abused his power for private gains. And number two, he took bribes, as did his family members. And number three, he had extramarital affairs with numerous women. That kind of thing, like other top-level Chinese officials had the same. But however, despite of the similarities, Bo was very unique in one important way. He knew how to manipulate the public opinion and successfully distinguished himself as a populist, politically correct, so-called. He portrayed himself as a people-loving, crime-fighting hero. But at the same time, his profile cracked down on what they call black society, actually the organized crime. Himself broke the law. And his whole family, including his followers, the police chief, became criminals. And he is also under investigation by the law. So I think there are a lot of lessons which we have to take, and I also hope, and I believe that the present and the new leaderships have to take away. That is from Bo's case. Number one, China must be aware of ambitious politicians making use of people's discontent for their own gain, undermining reform efforts and the rule of law in the process. Number two, we have to have Bo Xilai's case as a catalyst for political reform. In a more practical level, I think China should doesn't allow politicians to have absolute power over police for his or her own use. With a total control over police, Bo's authority over police in Chongqing, I think changed very dangerous, become totalitarian. Instead of authoritarian, become totalitarian. And also China should take lessons this way and take immediate steps to restrain the government's rule role in economy's reform, because he got so many opportunities in the past 20 years on seeking the rents. So, and also number 3, and should allow public scrutiny, including allow media to carry out its responsibility as a watchdog. And number 4, truly, as I share with Susan, like respect and install the rule of law. So adding to what Yan has said about the personal backgrounds with the new leadership, which I totally agree, I think the history has already offered a great opportunity for China to have a further in-depth reform.
Very, very interesting. We have some interesting questions here, and I'm going to pick up a little on one of the things you just said, Xuli, and ask some of the others before we continue on the economic and some of the tough issues that we see here. Does this case show us anything positive, encouraging, as you have mentioned, or not, about whether the political leadership is secure or insecure? About whether there is a harmonious kind of movement or the contrary, is it far from it? And are there any implications that you also would draw, in addition to what Xuli has said, about the impact that will have on political reforms to start off with, if any? Or does it show something else? Glad if you don't all agree, on the contrary.
Well, just quickly on the Bo Xilai's strategy, instead of moving up the ladder, playing the sort of elite politics game, as other leaders do, was to try to mobilize a popular following.
Let me just interrupt you there. If you could also answer the question, because you're on it. How does leadership rise in China? That's interesting, just as you were saying.
Leadership rises by a system of bureaucratic promotion decided by the party's organization department, which is basically a form of patronage, that it's supposed to be merit-based, and there are all sorts of criteria, but there's also a lot of personalistic patronage.
So was Bo Xilai different?
Bo Xilai had kind of reached a ceiling. His position as mayor of Chongqing was really not a promotion. And he was mistrusted, I think it's fair to say, by other top leaders because his style, he studied journalism, his style was always to use the media and try to reach out beyond the inner circle to mobilize a popular following.
Right.
That's, of course, a very dangerous thing for the Communist Party, because if you see those divisions at the top and somebody tries to mobilize a popular following, that could really lead to the unraveling of the party's power.
Anything anyone wants to add on this before we move on? Nope, you're happy with it. Good. There are some major questions here that have come both from the audience and from our previous discussions. And one of them you just mentioned before is, to what extent are we looking at any kind of reforms? Economic reforms, you can choose any way you want. Economic reforms, the problems of the state-owned enterprises, which, as everyone knows, certainly appropriate for themselves the better part of the resources, financial and otherwise, material as well. Is there going to be any changes there? Are there any reforms that are going to happen on the political side in light of what you have all just said? And what does that mean? What do we mean by reform on the political side? Is anything going to change, in your opinion, not just because of the change of leadership, but because it's in the cards, so to speak? It's on the way or not? So I open to the floor. Yan Lan, do you want to take a first try at this, and then we'll move to Minchin? Yes.
Yes. I think in the urgent agenda that the new leadership should take care is the first task for Xi and Li team will be address economic issue, economic slowdown, recently a lot of signals shows decrease of, for example, industrial production, increase of inventories, no increase of exportation, decrease of importation, etc. So all these signals for this slowdown, economic slowdown, shows that it's not a temporary issue, it is a structural issue. So they need to do urgently or push the transition. It starts, but it's very hard. Transition from an old economic model, which is labor-intensive, exportation-oriented, toward innovation-driven, sustainable economic growth model. So this is
with internal consumption
yes,
issues?
Exactly. So that means they need to emphasize and to develop domestic consumption model instead of relying mainly on exportation model.
So these are some of the economic reforms. Do you agree with those, or are there other things?
Well, these are the short-term ones. The short-term ones, in addition to trying to get China's growth back on track, they have to deal with some of the legacy issues. For example, the huge accumulation of bad loans in the banking system over the last few years.
That doesn't sound alien to any of us here.
And also excess capacity in the Chinese economy that is just destroying profitability of Chinese firms. And then the immediate policy choice is, what kind of policies do you use to stimulate the economy? Are you going to keep investing in infrastructure, building factories, or are you going to encourage consumption and do some tax cuts? So that's a huge policy.
Continue on that. We had some questions, and certainly in a few minutes I'll ask you if anyone wants to elaborate on them. Okay. Problems of aging, problems of the health infrastructure, health system, and other social services that are provided, are these under, let's say, growth and control, so to speak, of their growth, or are they getting out of...
Well, they're not thinking about these
they're
long-term
not thinking
issues.
About that.
If they, I think the previous leadership in the late 1990s actually thought about these issues and tried to do something, especially about the pension system. The current leader, the party leadership has been wasting 10 years, coasting along and not doing anything about these long-term, very difficult challenges.
So things like health system, public health systems, of course the aging problem, pension problem, these housing and so forth, these are going to continue to be major challenges, or are they getting their hands around it?
No, they're putting Band-Aid solutions. If something pops up on the public agenda, they do a little bit window dressing without dealing with some of the fundamental issues.
But we're seeing more and more, Xilai, all of you, we're seeing more and more public protest about certain things, particularly an unrest on environmental concerns. It's extremely high. At least we read a lot about this. And is this happening in any other field? Is this a broad kind of demand for services or for clarity or even for accountability? Or is it very restricted to the environmental area?
Yeah, I just want to add something about the economic
Please.
issues in China. I think because Mingxian and Yang talked quite a lot, but I just want to summarize the way I said the main problem in China, why it's so difficult to transfer from the import-oriented and labor-intensive model into a high-quality domestic market-oriented and with innovation, such a new model. Difficulty is because the government has put too much hands into the market and control the resources. The difficulty is this kind of way is not only generating rent sinking, like I mentioned before, but also have the whole market cannot function well. Mainly because we have, in the past 30 years, China has already economically, China has reformed as multiple parts, sectors with its economy. But for the main case sector, we call it the the key sector like a labor market, the resource market, including labor capital market, the money, the finance market, labor market, as well as resources like energy and coal minery. This part is the most important markets haven't been like thoroughly reformed and put big hands in that. I think that is a major problem China is facing and really difficult to get. I think actually in China there's no real deadly challenge that China, if do this kind of reform, all the problems we can resolve very soon. But without this reform, nothing you can do. So you mentioned all the problems, including like passion or anything you mentioned. But if Chinese government has made up its mind to do further reform, including economic reform, in a way the government less interfere. The government does what it should do and stop what it should not do. And at the same time, do political reform. China will go thoroughly. It'd be great. We can give a lot of problems, but it's easy to resolve with reform. So that is my general answer.
I would like to put you a challenge on that. If a bureaucracy, that is a series of government officials, analyze a problem and put their priorities and decide that they're going to take action, Xuli's take on it is they'll actually get it done. But the question I have for you is, what if that doesn't match exactly what the populace is concerned about? Can these kinds of reforms take place without parallel ones inside of accountability issues, inside of government structure and its responsibility towards citizens, inside of the cry for a green and sustainable growth, inside the demand for citizens in some way to have not only a monitoring but holding to responsibility? Can it happen just by bureaucratic analysis and brilliant analysis and decree? Or is there something missing in this equation? Let me ask Susan and Minxin and Yanlan on that.
Well, I think we would all agree that one reason that economic reform and social goods have not made much progress in the last 10 years is because there's too much power being held by state-owned enterprises and the bureaucracies you're describing. They've become kind of vested interests in the current arrangements, which give too much to some people. I mean, income distribution has become highly skewed. And the fact that the public has no way other than protests to really make the demands for the social safety net, education spending, things that they care about, is one of the reasons that things have stalled out. So if moving forward on just economic reform and social programs will be quite difficult unless they find a way to get more of the public voice into the equation.
Well, suppose the five of us were the top decision makers in China.
Yes.
Typically, we represent 3 points of view. One, I would call the pragmatic, technocratic point of view. We understand what exactly the solution is. The other kind would be very ideological. These are the people who strongly believe in the power of the state, in the leadership of the Communist Party. And then the third kind, what I would call opportunists. They don't care. All they care is about their own interests. So in this kind of decision-making environment, normally things don't get done. What can happen is, if there's a crisis, that will force them to bet on one thing or another. So I would say, if we look ahead, China needs a huge shock. Without a shock, we're going to see continuation of paralysis.
Yanlan, do you want to add anything on the business side? How do foreign investors look at this? Are they getting nervous or are they getting happy?
I think, as all the presidential election in U.S. or in France, before the election, no major decision was taken. This is, 1 week ago, I was in New York, and I was told by my U.S. friend. And in China, it's more or less the same. So since since this year, no major decision was taken. It's try to keep status quo until the new team take over. So I think this is a situation for foreign investors. Of course, I think we still keep our hope, and not only our hope. So China, if you look at the China market, so if you are an international group, the question is not whether or not you have to be in China. It's how you can be in China. This is an essential question. And how you can be in China, of course, linked with stability for the investment. We would like to see a stable environment for our investment. And the huge potential market is also very attractive. According to statistics, so don't forget, China market will be the most important domestic market in the world. So that means, like I said yesterday, so today we are made in China, and in 5 years they will be made for China. So this is the for investors mentality. So when we are international group, we have to be in China, have to develop China market. Of course, we are very observer. We would like China market to be more open.
Well, let me look at the internal a little bit, some of the internal situation. Two things have come up. The first is there is an expanding middle class in China now. A rise in wages, an expanding middle class. They have various expectations maybe right now coming up, or we have no idea what they think of this transition because they're not talked to. But nevertheless, there are upheavals in China of all different kinds. As I say, really big demands on the environmental, on the quality of life aspect, and there are many other social upheavals that give us only perhaps a one-sided view of what a middle classes might want. Give us only perhaps a very small view of whether the old bargain, you make me rich and I'll leave you politically alone, is maybe has some fractures in it. I'd like to hear what you think of some of these questions that you see coming up from the audience on the internal changes that are taking place in the society. Susan, Minchen, Shuli, and go ahead. Who would like to start?
I think you mentioned, I read here said about apparel issues and also the
right here is a question: how to overcome the past regression.
No, the first one.
The first one about social upheaval.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think it's as you mentioned. I think in the recent within this year, the major small level turmoil, the unrest in the grassroots level in China, can divide it into two sectors. One is about environmental issues, like in Shifang, in Qidong, in some other Chinese big towns. Dalian, that related a certain special project, which had been passed the kind of environmental evolution, but local people didn't accept it, didn't trust it, and insist that they didn't want that project. That's one sector. Right. Another is about the land property right. It's mainly from peasants who own the land, who worked on the lands, but didn't really own the land. But when the land was taken away for the commercial using, they would want to get better compensation. But the old party say for the compensation is too low for them. That kind of thing, but finally develop into a conflict. There are two kinds. I think that this kind of thing has proved that Chinese people are already very much aware of their own rights for their better living, for their rights, property rights.
So they're aware of their material rights, clearly.
Yeah,
their wages, their property, their compensation, and
I think for environmental issues, they are very clear on that, because they couldn't be fooled as maybe at our days, but now they are very, very aware of that, very sensitive, I should say. For if a company, a PX, some chemical company, brought protests maybe 5 years ago in other city. Now it moved to another city. There is another protest there. So it's very clear they are very, very sensitive on environmental issues, the local people, especially in big middle-size or small town. And another thing is even peasants who not that well educated but are already very well aware of their rights on land. That is two areas very easy to generate unrest in this year. I think that is, even if unrest is a progress, and the Chinese government has to and had to face such kind of challenges and try to resolve the problems well. And I still remember the protests happening in Shifang, which is in Sichuan province, about some environmental project, and it became a very, very big demonstration and brought a lot of anyway, very,
exactly, but
radical actions.
Let me just ask one thing here. We've seen these actions, but is the only way in which the populace can make known its dissatisfaction or even its satisfaction?
There are a lot of ways, but that is a very
is this the main
way?
All right. Is this, I will ask Minchin and Susan, is there any chance for a change in the way in which the populace, or is it going to just continue by unrest?
Yeah. Well,
by the way, we have 4 people here who speak Chinese, so among themselves they say things I have absolutely no idea what they're...
The use of protests has kind of become part of normal politics, but it has unfortunately also been an excuse for the internal police and security apparatus to get more budgets for themselves and to expand, because they define these protests as a great threat to the survival of Communist Party rule. So you've had a kind of inflated overdevelopment of internal security, which is generating its own problems. But Xilai noted also to me just now that the microblogs are another way in which Chinese citizens are monitoring the government and expressing their views. And this in China is very interesting because their version of Twitter is actually better than Twitter. Mm-hmm. It's a combination of Facebook and Twitter, really, and it is now more than 300 million people are using these microblogs on 2 main platforms. And it is kind of a marketplace of ideas. It's still censored, but it's more difficult to censor because it can, postings can spread exponentially to such large numbers of people so quickly. And you can be sure that the officials and the politicians watch what's being said on the microblogs very, very closely and get a lot of the feedback from the public through that channel.
Yeah, I want to say something really provocative, to leave you with something to think about. I would say that based on what the Chinese media is reporting, what I've been studying, what 4 other colleagues of mine are looking at, I would say that China is on the verge of a political revolution. That is, the current government is facing challenges on the political front, not just on the economic front. The middle class in China is getting increasingly disenchanted with this government. Poor environments, low social mobility, high inequality, very high levels of corruption, very high housing prices, which squeeze them out of the urban housing market. Very poor education opportunities and qualities. And then the Chinese public as a whole, when you look at the number of social protests, is growing less and less fearful of the government. And for authoritarian regimes that relies on repression to maintain power, this is a very serious warning sign. And then within this leadership, there's rising insecurity, lack of confidence about the future. If you look at what is happening to China's elites, especially political elites, they are all making preparations to abandon ship if there's trouble. So looking forward, we all pray for stability, but instability, when it comes, is something that this government really cannot avoid.
Well, that certainly put the, what do they call it, the cat among the pigeons here, of harmonious and quiet reform, steady. It's a little bit what you said. In order to have a reform, you're going to have a bit of a shake-up to get it on either side. Look, for a few minutes, towards the end, I am going to ask Susan about a little bit about the external relations as well, because that's quite contentious at this moment. But before then, I'll take 3 or 4 comments or questions if you have any in the audience, or if you don't, you're sending them to us, I know, through the messaging system. But can we have just a little bit of light, and I can see people? Excellent. Anyone would like to take the microphone? Anyone like to tell us, or do you want to send it to us? I can't see you terribly well. Let me go forward a little bit. All right. Does anyone want to say a few things directly, or would you prefer to send them to me in messaging? S'il y a question, je ne vois pas bien, malheureusement, avec la lumière. Voilà. Alors, il y a un micro. Merci beaucoup.
Yes, good morning. My name is Alison Smale. I'm the editor of the International Herald Tribune. Hi, Min-Hyun. A question for actually the other 3 panelists. Do you agree with his assessment that upheaval is coming and that this government is peculiarly ill-equipped to deal with it?
Another one? Anyone else would like to come in? Est-ce que vous voyez s'il y a un autre main, parce que je vois pas très bien. Then let's start with that one.
Well,
Susan, off.
I'll
Go
start.
off.
You know, I don't think I completely agree with Pei Min-Shin that because there is a certain amount of disaffection, there are protests, there are frictions within the leadership, that the People's Republic of China is doomed to fall in the next few years. For one thing, I predicted political change in China already maybe 20 years ago, so my record for prediction is really poor. So, you know, you can have all sorts of tensions and frictions and discontents, but actually organizing collective action to bring about political change is very, very challenging. And there are still a lot of repressive features of the Chinese system, which make it dangerous for people to organize collective action. I mean, I spent September in China looking for signs that maybe the Central Committee, which has the formal authority to choose leaders, might actually claim that power this time. And I couldn't find any indication that such a thing would be happening. And once again, they're going to use the smoke-filled room approach, even though people say it's no longer legitimate. But organizing to have an alternative, another way of doing things, is extraordinarily difficult. So I think we always overestimate. I mean, I wrote a book called China, Fragile Superpower. So, you know, I'm on record as seeing lots of internal fragility in the regime and the great insecurity of the leadership. But that could continue for a very long period of time.
All right. So, Xu and then Yanlan, do you disagree with Pei Mingxin, or do you agree with Susan Shirk?
I think I partly agree and partly not. I think if there's a really thorough, comprehensive reform, it can stop the collapse and the revolution in China. But if without reform, of course, like you can expect what is going to happen. But I still hope and I believe there are opportunities, there are windows for China to carry out a real in-depth reform to resolve all the challenges we are facing. We have opportunities. The question is whether we can get it. We can take the window to do that.
I'd like to suggest from the outside on a historical perspective on these things a little bit. We're not very good at seeing around the world. Not very good. We haven't seen many examples of the change from a more closed system, an authoritarian or less authoritarian, more bureaucratic but closed, to one where there is a direct connectivity with citizens in governance. We don't see those transitions ever, at least I don't remember too many of them happening, maybe in Burma right now, in Myanmar, but usually they don't happen very easily. They don't happen smoothly. They don't happen in a linear way. There is disruption that causes these things to happen. Even in Myanmar, there was a severe economic contraction that led to it. What we've seen across the rest of the world has not been, neither in Africa nor in the Middle East, changes that occur with a kind of small collective pressures where an enlightened then governance says, oh, well, you know, we're not going to hang on to power here, nor to our ideology. We will make changes. So I'm not quite sure how we should view, you keep saying that it hasn't happened, you keep predicting it a little bit like Yogi Berra. It's hard to make predictions, particularly about the future. It's difficult for us to make a prediction, but in the next years, let's just look at the next years, do you see just incremental movements in this area, a continued bureaucratization, and when I say bureaucratization, I mean technologically, within the power structure, or do you see any disruptions?
Well, I think there are actually some good models for the Chinese leadership right in their own neighborhood. The political evolution of South Korea and Taiwan are striking examples of leaders with vision who managed to move from authoritarianism to democracy. Mm-hmm. Indonesia is another example. And so, and the Taiwan example in particular, because those are Chinese people, is, I think, a very powerful inspiration mm-hmm. for many people in China. So, you know, all my friends in China say, oh, there's going to be a crisis, and then we'll see progress. It'll take a crisis.
Do they mean an economic crisis,
you know, I don't think they know. And sometimes they even think about foreign policy crisis. Uh-huh. Like some people posting on Weibo about the conflict with Japan over the Senkaku Diaoyutai Islands were taking up the nationalist cause and saying, well, I think we should attack Japan over the islands, because either we will win and then we get the islands, or if we lose, we get a new China. And what they mean by that, I believe, is that there would be an internal revolution in China against the current government for failing to achieve this nationalist goal, and that would help bring about welcome political change inside China, which is, you know, kind of a screwy way of thinking about it. Do we really have to go through all that when instead the leadership could lay out a long-term program for political reform, which I believe could help them continue in power, much as the Kuomintang did the KMT previously.
Right. We're coming slowly towards the end of our session here, and a lot of the questions that have come up also concern something we haven't talked about at all, and I'm going to ask you. People were wondering, is there going to be any women at the top of the leadership in this transition? And second, they're asked about the condition of women in China. First of all, let me go to the leadership issue, picking up from the session before. Yanlan, is there any chance of any women in the top leadership now in this transition, or are they not on the possible slate?
I don't have the precise list of names, but what I like to say is indeed I was very happily surprised to learn, well, to notice, for example, in France, we have 50% of ministers in the new government, while in China, we have very, very few, one or two only. So
is it going to change?
Well, the change, for the time being, I should say, for me, I should say the women is very active in the sector where you have a free competition. Yeah. You have in the private sectors, for example, they have a lot of women CEO, women leaders, but in the political one, very, very few. I think it will change when in the economic sector, the private women leaders play an important role, and they take as an opinion leader. At that time, they will play an important role in political life. But it's not for the time
not
being.
In the political.
And you can see for the free competition, this year we have more female Olympic golden winner than male one. So you see, so the Chinese lady are very competitive.
Certainly, we have big examples of outstanding women entrepreneurs.
May I give some numbers?
Right here.
I think it's much easier for China for women to become a business leader than a political leader. We know all the numbers, like 31% of the Chinese companies have female participation in ownership. And top 50 in Financial Times, top 50 women in the world of business in 2011, 5 of them from China. And Forbes list the world's richest self-made women list in 2011, 14 billionaires are from China. But in political sector, it's very difficult. I should say like 120% legislators are female, 13%, 1/3 of ministerial positions are held by women. And the number of female heads of state, the answer is easy, 0. And what's more alarming is that the percentage of our women on the Communist Party's Central Committee, that is a decision maker, very important, and its alternates have shrunken from more than 11% in 1977 and less than 10% today.
So it's gone down.
I think it's very clear the gender disparity between private and public sectors electorates what's recognized as an unbalanced development in pattern in China the same way.
Well, that explains why Chinese politics is so hopeless.
And also, I mean, how foolish are the party leaders? I mean, if you're trying to establish the legitimacy of the party and you can't even figure out a way how to promote more female leaders, this really shows incredible short-sightedness and greediness, really.
Now, we're coming to the end of our session. By the way, I'll be asking you to stay, please, in the hall for the next one. We have a slight difference of opinion here, but we seem to be on the same track. And that track is that everyone on this panel feels that there are certain changes we call them reform, but we don't know, I mean, that's already a loaded word. Let's say certain changes, economic, social, and political, that are nevertheless underway at this time in China, and that there are some encouraging signs that these will take place. Now, whether they take place in a disruptive way, or whether they take place, as you suggest, in the model that we've seen in countries that had a more authoritarian, but not, and a one-party, by the way, and a one-party system, not called the Communist Party, but it was a one-party system in such areas as Taiwan and Korea, and even now authoritarian in Myanmar. We differ as to whether it will be more or less disruptive, and to whether or not there will be a real change in the way in which the citizens, which is, as you all know, the most gigantic number of citizens, to bring about their own voice in different ways. And I would just like to ask you at the end, not a prediction, but the way in which you think most of this change will evolve. And I ask you that because there is a, I would put it this way, a concern about the amount of what I call opacity, and what we discussed before, is sort of non-transparent, but opacity of secrecy that surrounds everything in China that's official or semi-official, including statistics, including what's going on with the state-owned enterprises. And there are ways in which even the foreign community is trying to open those doors a little bit. So I do ask you, from what area, what vector will some of these changes be more precipitated by than others? Will it be wage demands, popular views on social issues? Will it be a dissatisfaction with that old bargain? Give me material well-being and I'll leave my rights and political things to the side. Where will it come from? Yan Lan. I'm sorry, did I put you, would you like to go afterwards? We'll start with Xu Li. We'll start with Xu Li then.
I think China needs comprehensive reforms. I think the single reform, or taking the easiest way, we have done it for many, many years. Chose the easiest part to start and did it in an unbalanced way. This time, this way, with less obstacle. Next time, I think it has been proved it's not the way to finish or to finally success for the reform. So I think what China needs is comprehensive reform in a possibly fast way, with the less cost, socially, financially less cost.
Okay.
And if China can do it, I think the plan is clear. China can do it. The vision is clear, the plan is clear. China can do it. The question is whether it is going to do it.
Yan Lan or Pei Minxin? Yan Lan?
I think it's, I totally agree with Xu Li said. And I think the urgent agenda, again, is from economic transition and also social reform. It's very important because redistribution of welfare is an essential issue now because the gap
is getting bigger.
The gap is bigger and bigger between the rural population and urban population and the new rich. So this is cause a lot of concern, the social issues.
You all read that China has more billionaires than Britain.
But
yes?
if you talk about the redistribution, it comes to redistribution of the income or redistribution of the opportunity. So once we talk about equal income or equal opportunity.
Probably opportunity.
Once we talk about opportunity, it's related with a lot of issues, not only about the income issue.
I think you're probably right on that one.
Well, very quickly, I think the window of opportunity for gradual reform that is not going to be disruptive is closing. I would say in the next 5 years, no more than 5 or 7 years, if the Chinese government, the new leadership, does not make the changes we think it should make, then the risks for disruptive change are much greater. One thing we've noticed, about 80 countries have made the transition from authoritarian rule to democracy in the last 40 years. And one thing that is common is that elites that recognize the crisis of the regime early and start making the changes sooner end up better. They avoid disruption. They avoid Arab Spring-style collapses. So for this government, they really have to ask this fundamental question. Are we going to resist democracy tooth and nail till the bitter end, or are we going to take the steps earlier and sooner?
Susan.
And, you know, I think expectations of political reform from the leadership of the Chinese Communist Party are quite low. Therefore, what they could do in the next 5 years is lay the foundation for a stable democracy later on. Because what we don't want is democratization on a weak foundation which will fall apart very quickly. So that means civil society allowing non-governmental organizations to organize more freely. It means a functioning legal system, which we don't have now, and it means freedom of the press. And even without introducing any elections or any other institutional changes, those changes would really make a tremendous difference in China for the ability to carry out other reforms. And the bonus is that the rest of the world would be so encouraged that China would get so much goodwill from the rest of the world, and it would ease a lot of the international tensions as well.
On that hopeful note, I would like to ask you to thank this brilliant panel for so many interesting things. Thank you very much.